Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. We are a truly worldwide audience, and today we have a remarkable guest. I've known her for a number of years, and I'm sure that you're just going to love to learn more about her. Candy Barone, also known as a tree shaker, a change catalyst, a transformational leader. She's a Fortune 500 speaker, a trainer, executive coach, podcaster, blogger, best-selling author. Candy, why don't you just jump out here and join us?
Thank you so much, Red. It is so good to be here with you. I appreciate being on the show. It's
been a while. I'm going to say a couple of years before COVID was the last time I saw you live, and maybe even longer than that, because I sometimes get some of the people confused. But we used to have a fairly active in-person networking system is not quite the right word, but a lot of networking in the Houston area. And depending on where you were, what was going on, we had some literally world-class, just like you, world-class speakers who would show up and provide information. And sometimes we'd be attending a presentation for someone else, and then they would show up in the audience. So, but what's happened to you since COVID? I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of changes, but let's kind of back up a little bit before COVID. COVID hit. How did that affect you?
Yeah, so I laugh a little bit because I think most of us can say that it feels like the last 3 years has been probably about 30 years of experience with all of the shifts and the changes. And so it was really interesting because for me in particular, at the start of COVID, I had to actually redesign my business so that I could be more in person. I actually wanted to create more live, in-person, intimate containers. And so I had set 2020 as an opportunity to pull away from some of my virtual and be doing more in Austin and in Houston and some of the areas in Texas, and then minimizing where I was traveling so that it was more deliberate. So then COVID hit, and obviously that model going into 2020 was not set up to work with COVID. And so it took me probably about 3 or 4 months to really reset and bring my business back online into a more virtual capacity. And so there was a lot of blessings, a lot of gifts through it. But I would say that initial pass coming out of COVID was rather difficult. And I was fortunate that I had a tremendous amount of experience being virtual prior. So the shift wasn't as painful for me as it was for others. And so that was 2020 was a very upheaval year, so to speak. And then by the end of 2020, I was in a groove and back with, virtual spaces and virtual retreats and trainings and workshops. And so it sort of shifted everything on a dime for me.
Well, it's interesting because prior to COVID, I did have a fair amount of virtual time on Skype and on Zoom with not so much networking, but I was involved with Toastmasters and some of the things, and that was the normal way of doing their training and other things. So the COVID came in, and it was just an extension of the tools, but a different environment. Speaking in front of a live audience is one thing. Speaking in front of a camera, totally different experiences. I'm sure you can attest. But I see that you're a tree shaker. I love that word. I really and truly do. Change catalyst. How did you get involved in being an expert, a go-to person for making change, particularly at the executive level in companies, because that's where it really needs to happen. And that's unfortunately where it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, great question. And I would say it's a couple things. One, I mean, I have 20 years of corporate experience under my belt. So there was a lot of things that I saw that were not working. In fact, it's interesting when I work with my clients, especially the leaders that I work with, there's 3 questions I ask them when they're looking at how to strategize on utilizing their gifts. And so those same 3 questions really worked for me, because it got to a point where I'm like, okay, what if I look at this industry, and if I look at leadership, or I look at the coaching industry, I'm like, what is working well that I think needs to be amplified? And so for me, I really took some stock and inventory in what works well for leaders, what works well for transformational leaders, and how do we build that? How do we start to create more momentum around growing that asset? The second question is, what pisses me off, or what pisses you off about the industry or the space that you're playing in? And I say that because it's those things that really trigger us, or those things that we're like, this is broken, or it's not working, or it just gets under my skin. And so I looked at the things that, from the way we define leadership and the way we're executing leadership, there was a huge disconnect. And there was a big disconnect around, 1, how we were defining it, and 2, not always walking the talk, right? And so it really started to create some energy around, there needs to be a change. And you, when you feel that, that's sort of that call to drive you forward to say, all right, this is my lane. And then the third space is, what's missing? What's missing from this environment that I feel I uniquely am equipped or have passion to fill that gap? And so for me, there was a couple things. One, in my early years of starting this, I mean, I've been doing this on my own now for over a decade. I really not seeing the soft skills or human skills in leadership. It was too much about the bottom line, and it wasn't enough about the people. It wasn't enough about culture. And so really helping people draw the lines and connect the dots between the two. Also, in terms of how most organizations or most leaders define ROI. So when you think about the return on investment you make in growing your leaders or growing your organization, oftentimes it was a money in versus money out equation. And it was missing the fundamental of what I would say the function of time, money, energy, people, culture, and lifestyle. And so to change the narrative or change the conversation became a passion of mine, so that we could redefine leadership as something that was accessible for everyone. And it was ultimately a choice in, can you lead yourself first, and can you tap into your unique gifts in a way that is creating connections and deeper and richer cultures, versus it just being about growing an organization and profiting the bottom line.
I likewise have been in many different organizations at the higher corporate levels, and sometimes you get this decree, this is what we're going to do, but there's no backup to it. It's just words, and you see that very quickly. It doesn't take very long to see it's a hollow address of a problem. I remember back in the military, back in the 70s, when we had race relation issues, and Navy took a very, very positive step forward. I mean, just no questions. Everybody knew what was going on and what would happen. So you have something that was very fast, well-known, clarified, dramatic, boom, and it worked. Yeah. And you have other ones that, because we have a slight downturn in the industry, we're going to lay off some people, we're going to do this, and they never really change. It's like the change is needed, but they can't see the change is needed because they've been doing everything. They keep doing everything they always did and expect different results. Paraphrase several people that come up with something like that. But when you get, I noticed one of the things that I was doing some research on you talk about, you want to be able to find out where that pilot light is in somebody's psyche, so that when you turn it on and they start feeling the heat of a passion that's been hidden, where they can now inspire others. How do you find that pilot light? How do you get that little fire started under people?
Yeah. And so before I answer that question, I want to comment on something you just said, which was that whole idea of them staying in this space where they can't see the entirety of what's going on. And I always say, we talk about you can't see the forest for the trees. I oftentimes will say you can't see the forest for the trees when you're the one cutting down the lumber and shucking it out of the woods, right? And so there's oftentimes that I find leaders are too micro invested in things that aren't them playing at their highest and best level. And so that leads me to what you just asked, which is how do you help people kind of tap into that innate wiring, or that innate, the way that they are designed to show up, to lead, to actually be able to leverage those opportunities. And one of the things that pre-pandemic, but has been profound through the last 3 years or so as we've navigated through the pandemic, was I actually was introduced from a client of mine after coming off a really big spiritual retreat where I was doing some of my own work as a leader, doing some healing work, doing some really deep work. I brought it back to one of my masterminds, and in true form as a manifestor, my client at the time had said, have you ever explored human design? And I have to tell you, it's interesting because you think about the limitations or the constructs that we put on ourselves as leaders, and that sometimes we have this narrative that doesn't allow us to see something outside of what we know. My initial response to that, or I should say reaction, was, I don't want another woo-woo thing. I don't need another assessment. I wanted no part of it. And yet something about what she asked me sort of lit that pilot light that you're talking about. It created a spark. And there was a spark of curiosity that made me say, maybe I should go explore and figure out what this really is. And what was interesting about it is right away, I found out it wasn't an assessment. It's actually an energetic blueprint or a wiring of our innate coding. And so we each have different skills, different gifts, different things that we're here to activate. We all have access to energy. It's just how we manipulate it that's different. And what was interesting is when I started to bring that work in as another layer in the strategic work that I do with my clients, it was a game changer. It was a way to coach my clients differently. And it was a way to look at and explore the human element in their organization differently, the energy of their organization differently. And so one of the things that's been really profound in the work that I do has been delving into and going down multiple rabbit holes to become an expert in the language of human design and understanding what the energetic blueprint of an individual leader looks like, and the energetic blueprint of their organization, because I can actually do a human design analysis on their organization. And when you can see that each has its own energy, and there are leverage points and leadership markers within that energy, the way you create strategy, vision, the way you're cultivating and developing a culture shifts, because now you're doing it with an energetic blueprint in mind, not just from a very linear, what are your goals? What are your objectives? How are you going to build your strategies and tactics? It's how do you do it and bring it together and do both. And so that has been really an eye opener. And so to be able to find those spark points, you can actually map them out in your design. And so I feel I've become someone who is able to light that spark under people so that they can truly remember how to light that spark within them, which is the epitome of how we get to lead. It's how do I light that spark for myself and lead from that space so that then I can offer what I'm here to share with others at the highest and best capacity, so I can lead them as well.
So self-sparking motivation and leadership.
For sure.
Sounds like the title of your next book.
Oh, I like that. I got many titles going right now. I'm like trying to work through a few titles on the next one.
What you said has a lot of implications, but could you take us through maybe an example of a particular, don't give a name, John Doe, but take us how you found something and how you kind of rolled around in the rabbit holes for a while to, okay, I found a lifeline, and you kind of solved the problem. Because what you're talking about sounds really interesting, but how do you go about actually making it happen?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I had a conversation. I've had ongoing conversations. Right now I'm doing a lot of human design readings because I want to get people tapped into that energetic blueprint and understanding that. But I had a conversation just even over dinner last night with someone who's been feeling a little bit out of alignment, right? And so we had a conversation, and as we're mapping out specific leadership markers within his design, there was a couple things that became really noteworthy. One, first of all, just even in our type, how we make decisions. One of the things that I think has been so eye-opening for me in the work that I do with leaders around their human design is that we're not all wired the same way to make decisions. And so what I mean by that is me making a decision as what's known as a manifesting generator. I make decisions and I have an emotional authority. I have to ride out the wave of my intense emotions. I can get shiny squirrel syndrome really quickly. And if I say yes to something when I'm in an intense, passionate, energetic, emotional state, oftentimes it will come back and bite me in the butt later on because it wasn't the right decision for me that actually feels right and correct for what I'm here to offer. And I get myself jammed up to where then I create burnout, right? So one of the most profound things that I've been able to map out for leaders specifically is where does imposter syndrome show up for them and where does burnout, where are they naturally prone to burnout? And a lot of that comes from the openness in your design. So anyway, to go back to a conversation I had last night, this person was feeling a bit out of alignment. And as we were mapping things out, one, he had a lot of power energy in his chart. So he's here to lead from a place where others need to draw him out. And he is here to help people remember that they are sovereign beings and how to tap back into that personal, primordial, pure power, that personal power. And some of how he's doing that is to help people that are going through transition, say retirement, where they're feeling this sense of loss of purpose. They're feeling a sense of loss of identity. They're feeling a sense of loss of direction because we have a whole culture that says, well, when you retire, now you're basically, you have no value, right? We kind of have a culture set up that way. So I said, you're naturally attracting, and we could see it mapped out in his chart. He's naturally attracting those people that feel lost in their sense of purpose, their sense of identity, and their sense of direction. And I said, no wonder you're doing the work you're doing. And it was such an epiphany conversation because even he said, I was feeling out of alignment. And all of a sudden that just made so much sense. I said, you're here to help people remember they have agency and authority over the value they feel so that they can continually be offering something from a leadership capacity, even in what would be called a transition or retirement, right? And so we map that out. I mean, he has unique leadership markers where somebody else like me, I have more alpha energy. I have a lot of power energy and alpha energy. It shows in my chart, I'm here to disrupt and redefine what leadership means. And I'm here to disrupt and redefine what power means. And so when you look at the work that I do, it's very aligned to have that conversation. His work is aligned to invite those that are feeling lost in their sense of identity, purpose, and direction to call them in to help them get clarity and ground themselves. And it's something that feels more aligned for them. And so I hope that gave you a little bit of maybe an example of how that works.
It did a lot because I'm thinking about, we have different cultures that are prominent now in a lot of our industries. We have major age differences between, the senior management leadership and some of the functional heads. And each of those have a little bit of different because, maybe they grew up and stayed pretty much in the same one, or their parents were professionals. I can see where some of these innate things that you're diving into probably have a tendency to change over time, hopefully for the better, but sometimes they just stagnate and don't. But do you approach somebody who's 55, 65 years of age, senior executive, versus somebody who's a new startup who's 28? How do you approach that different age group with regard to what you're doing with the human engineering thing?
Well, and what's interesting about that is I'm not, because the thing is their design helps guide me into what's going to be most effective in terms of how to coach them. The way I arrive there can be multiple ways I arrive there. It's kind of like when somebody asks me, am I a life coach or a business coach? And my response is yes. And they're like, which are you? I'm like, which do you need? Because it's still going to come back to you. I don't care what door we enter. And so it's not as much about age as it is about their unique wiring and coding. And so, for example, someone who, I mean, it's more of what type are you, and how do you make decisions, and what is your authority, and what do you have defined in your chart versus what's open in your chart. And so there are nuances in your chart that won't change. There are flavors, or it's kind of like peeling back the onion, that where you might be in the shadow side of something, you move into more of your gift, or there's things that maybe you need to decondition because in your open areas, you're getting a lot of programming that you're amplifying, you're absorbing, and you're amplifying other people's stuff. So it's the way of how do you kind of cut the noise. What happens is, basically, when I work with somebody, we do their human design right away. So all of my one-on-one clients go through this, and now I'm doing this in some of the groups, and I'm doing this on a more global scale. But we do an initial reading because it's not about their age and their experience as much. Now, that will have a play in it, as it is what is the operating plan of them look like, because human design is essentially an operating plan of how you function. It's not who you are. You get to decide who you are, but human design is giving me an operating plan of how you're wired. What energy do you have consistent access to, and what energy are you drawing in from other people? And so when we can see that as a foundation, I then get prompted on how to ask them the questions that are going to be most meaningful for them based on what shows up in their chart. So if you think about, a lot of people like to think of human design as another assessment. It's not. It's literally an energetic blueprint. It's quantum mechanics, and it's a lot of, I Ching, Kabbalah. It's Eastern philosophy and Western science, and they merge together in a way that basically, when you were born and the time, location, and date of your birth, there's an energetic blueprint that was created in the portal that brought you into the world, right? And so, that being said, I can actually map people's DISC or Myers-Briggs or something in their human design, because what's been fascinating to me about that is this is where, when those assessments all serve a point, a lot of them are very behavioral, they're around communications, and they're based on a filter. That being said, someone, for example, on the DISC assessment who's a high DI, myself included, why and how I'm a high DI might look different than somebody else that's a DI. So like I said, I have a lot of alpha energy. I have a lot of power energy in my chart. Someone else might have more influential leadership, or might have something that is driving something differently in the way they lead, but they're still a DI. When you can understand those nuances, it changes the conversation, and it changes the way that you can actually see that person, coach that person, and elevate that person. And so I do that not only for the leaders, but then I do that oftentimes for their team and their entire organization as well. And so then you start to see how the pieces all come together, and it's like taking all the pieces of the puzzle and sort of rearranging them in a way that's going to be more effective and more efficient than maybe just assuming, okay, you're 55, you're 28, therefore I got to look at you this way. Not every 55-year-old has the same energy. Not every 28. I want to start from an energetic standpoint first, and then bring in those other nuances and add them in as kind of the flavoring versus the other way around, if that makes sense.
It actually makes all the sense in the world. I was thinking back to my very early days in the military. I'm a naval aviator, and we had this guy stand up on stage in Pensacola as a naval flight surgeon, and it was called Sex and the Naval Aviator Part 2. And it was a psychological profile of naval flight personnel. And one of the first questions he asked was, everybody in here is the oldest born male in the family, please stand up. And almost everybody in the audience stood up. He says, you're not going to find that in the Air Force. You're not going to find that in other industries. He says, you want to even know something that's even more than that? So everybody sit down. So those of you who are married to the oldest born female in the family, stand up. And I mean, there's an affinity of the oldest born male to naval aviation, oldest born male to the oldest born female. And he went in to describe that psychological connection. And as I'm looking at it, and I go into different squadrons, different places in my career, you look, okay, 95% of the people in here are oldest born males. And when you ask them, and so they're all married to the oldest born female. But again, that's a unique environment. I'm sure the military hierarchy, when I've had submariners in charge, I've had surface guys in charge, and they're totally different cultures. I mean, they're the same age, same rank, same literal experience, but they're, as you talk about, their human design
Yep.
is totally different. And you would expect some similarity, even within the aviation ranks. They talked about, okay, this particular community, when they're having a party, it's more important for them as to how much the damages were to the bar, as opposed to what the vintage of the wine was.
Right.
And again, part of this is brought on because we were fighting Vietnam at that time and doing a lot of flying over there. But again, I like what you're telling me about human design, that there's something in there, and sometimes you can turn that little flame up a little bit, or sometimes just really crank it up. But the change is there. Now, I did read your blog yesterday. I thought that was very fascinating. And the reason I'm bringing that in is because you had an interesting childhood, but you've developed in spite of what you were up against. And so not everyone does that. What actually happened as you're going out of college and starting on your own to change yourself to a more positive, what you need, what you want, and what you expect in life?
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you for reading my blog. Second of all, I would say there's two things, or maybe three things I would offer. One is, in my wiring, I have a natural propensity for optimism. I have a Sagittarius moon, first of all, which is a very optimistic. My why is driven by the realm of possibility. I believe in imagine if. I believe in the realm of potential and possibility. It's literally how I'm wired. I have a wide open head in Ajna. I have this space where I see all the possibilities, and I have specific things that are defined in my chart that are wired for optimism. So I had a bit of an advantage coming in from that perspective. It is part of my soul curriculum. Part of my soul curriculum is to model and teach the possibility of a higher level consciousness and a alignment and truth in remembering who we are. And so in order to do that, and it's interesting because I'm known as I'm called a 6-2 emotional manifesting generator. And the sixth line for me has these very distinct phases. I have 3 distinct phases, and I was designed to experience more life than a lot of people. 3 lines and 6 lines are going to have a lot more experience in life, and often can be very trauma driven, abuse driven, generational lineage that we're here to help clean up and unpack. And so oftentimes someone that's in that position, especially a 6 line, is here to clear out a lot of familial lineage and generational trauma that is an ongoing pattern in their family. And so there was a sense, even when I was younger, that I knew I was here for something bigger than myself. I can remember my mom jokes all the time. Even when my first book came out, when I first left corporate, started my business, a decade ago, when I put my book out, my mom said, you always knew you were going to write a book? And I said, yeah, I've always known it. She goes, but it was really interesting. She said, people would ask you the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which we could do a whole nother show on why I think that's the dumbest question we ask kids. But anyway, I digress. People would say to me, I would be 3 years old, and they would say, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I would look at them like they were crazy, because even then I thought that question was not the right question. And I would respond. My mom would joke. She would say, your response was very interesting. Do you remember what you would say? And I said, yeah, I know exactly what I used to say. And she goes, it was so not a typical answer. So they would ask that question, and I would respond and look at them and say, it doesn't matter. I'm going to change the world. And they would patronize me and placate to me and say, oh, sweetie, that's so cute. What are you going to be? And I said, no, you're not listening. I'm going to change the world. And this would go on for about a cycle of 3 times. And the third time I would put my hands on my hips and I would kind of get my feet grounded, and I would look at them square in the eye. And I said, I'm going to change the world, and I'm going to write a book. And there was a knowing that I was here to do something. And so what was interesting is I had a hard fight for a long time when I was younger, because one of my first defining moments was at 8 years old. And it was a moment where I recognized I was demonstrating behaviors that my dad did, because I thought if I acted like him, he would love me. Needless to say, it broke my heart because I was being very narcissistic and I was being very abusive to one of my sister's friends. And it was this whole situation. And so in that moment, I made a decision where I said, I will never, ever, 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 all the nevers time infinity be my father. I will never, ever, 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 never times infinity put that look on another human being's face. And I will save the life. I will make sure that I can save the life of at least one kid if I have to adopt them all. Right. And so 8 years old, that's a pretty profound realization to have. And so I spent a good bulk of my years, probably through my mid 30s until I hit a hard rock bottom in corporate, on this sort of dichotomy, double-edged sword route where I wanted to change the world and I was angry at the world. I was angry at my lot in life. I was angry at my dad. I was angry at God, source, whatever you want to call it. I was just angry. And so it wasn't until my first cycle completed at 28 where I had another defining moment where my story actually saved the life of another kid that I recognized I had a choice to make. Because one of the things that was part of my struggle was I looked exactly like my father and I have all of his characteristics. And my mom used to say something interesting that earlier I didn't recognize it. It wasn't until I saw the impact of the choice. She said, yeah, but you use his qualities for good. And I used to joke and say, you make me sound like a superhero. She said, well, and I started to realize that for every characteristic there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum that keeps us in what I would call now the shadow or the unhealed or the self-serving energy, which is that lower frequency, lower vibration. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, which is the highest level of consciousness. It's the gift, the highest level being the CD, but the gift of I get to use this to serve others. So I look at, for example, power in my chart. My dad had a lot of power, but my dad used it for his own gain. I use it to help people remember that they're sovereign beings. I help it to light that fire, that spark, so that people step back into a place where they're aligned in themselves and in their own authenticity. And so we have a choice. And I think about it right now. I'm reading the book by Dr. Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan, which is all about the gap or the gain. I can look at everything that happened as something that happened to me, or I could look at it as it happened for me to serve. And so it was interesting because when I got to the point to write my book, my mom said, you always knew you're going to write a book. It took you 40 years. And I said, I needed the story. I needed to be able to have the context to share what I was here to teach. And when we think about the fact that for me, it opened up a pathway that said everything that happened to me in my childhood happened so that someday I would step into my purpose. And so when I realized that all of that was for me, I get to take that as a gain, as the learning, as the lesson, because it then allows us, and again, to use Dr. Hardy's language, it allows us to change the narrative from using our past to dictate our present and our future, and reframing that to say, I'm going to now take my present to make meaning of my past. And I'm going to look at what my future self wants, needs, and who that is to make decisions in the now. And so then that creates that place where we take our personal power back. That's the definition of sovereignty. When I can say, I am not the abuse, I am not the trauma, I am the choice in what story I choose to bring forward as a result of that. Maya Angelou said it so well, where she said, our trauma is not the incident. The abuse, the incident can be horrific. It's the ongoing story we tell that creates the trauma. And I decided long ago that I didn't want to carry that now I see my dad as being the biggest blessing that ever happened in my life. I wouldn't wish him on anyone, but I also would not be who I am and empowered to do the work that I do without the journey I had that was necessary with him to get to that point.
Okay, so here's a lighter one. Tell us about your journey not into professional baseball.
Oh my God. Oh, I love it. Oh, see, you just touched my heart. Baseball's in my blood all the way through. And I mean, little trivia fact for you. My great grandmother, Helene Hathaway Robeson Britton, actually was the first woman to own a Major League Baseball team. She owned the St. Louis Cardinals before women could even vote. In fact, she was the catalyst, talking about a spark. She was the catalyst that allowed Women's Day, where women could go catch a ball game without needing a male escort. So kudos to my grandmother for that. But really, baseball. At one point, I actually wanted to be a sports announcer. I had a fear back in the day that if I would have followed that path, I would have ended up hating baseball as a result. Somehow, I think I had a wiring way long ago that said I can't do what I really love, because if I do it as a job, I'm going to end up hating it. So I moved into a different direction instead.
I got one more question for you before we wrap things up today. I know you're a prolific reader, and a lot of people who are executive coaches and transformation, they have to stay up with everything. But
Sure.
what do you really and truly enjoy reading? I know you read, at least 50 books a year. What is your go-to book when you just really want to relax and read?
I have to say, I know there is a part of me that feels like I'm shooting all over myself, because I know I'm supposed to read lighter things and like, what's your fiction? But truthfully, the things that I jones for are personal development books or spiritual books. I am constantly got an audiobook that's in the professional development or psychology space or spirituality space. I mean, to just say that this is my current read, and it's nothing light. I don't know. I don't do a lot of light reading. If I do, I blow through it in a matter of like a couple hours, and it doesn't satiate as much. So I am always looking for things that expand my thinking, expand my perspective, let me tap into reframes. Recently, I've been all in Adam Grant's books around hidden potential and thinking differently and think again. And so I love things that challenge how I think, how I operate, how I lead. So a lot of leadership book, professional development books, human design books, tend to grab me. Even for my light reading, it's usually not what most people would call light reading. I don't know. I like the substance. I like to challenge myself. I like my brain to be constantly in motion. And so it's usually somewhere in the professional development realm that is grabbing my attention, and I can't stop reading. But I'm usually reading 5 books at once. Also part of my design. I don't usually read one book at a time. I'm usually got multiple books going on at once. So that helps. I kind of feel into which one's speaking to me at the moment.
Understand. I do the same. Okay, we're wrapping up the show today, and I really and truly enjoyed it. I would love to have you come back again. Can't do it this year, but maybe next year.
Absolutely.
Because we got 2 weeks left in this year.
Right, for sure. And I would love to. So it's been such an honor to be on the show with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Who is an ideal client for you, and how do they get in touch with you, and what value will you be giving them?
Oh, God, I love that question. What a beautiful question. My ideal client is hungry. And when I say they're hungry, they are hungry for change. They are hungry for deeper meaning, connection, and a sense of knowing that the work they do is going to be impactful for themselves and others, but also creates a sense of fulfillment and peace for themselves. And so I want people that are ready to be lit up. And I am shifting away from my ideal client being thought leaders. I am great. Idea generation is great. Status quo disruption is great. I actually want transformational leaders. I want leaders that really want to roll up their sleeves and want to get gritty and want to get into the stuff that most people run screaming from. So it is those leaders that really are like, there has to be something more. It can't, this hamster wheel we're on cannot be the American dream, or if you're not in America, whatever version of that might look like. That just, it's time to disrupt. I want the tree shakers. I want the catalysts. I want the people that want to blow some things up. That being said, the best way to get a hold of me is either through my website, which is candybarone.com, literally spelled candybar1.com. I can't make that up. Or even reaching out to me directly at email, candybarone@gmail.com. The value that you would get from, if you are my right client, now there's an application process to actually be my client. client, because I'm very clear about who I work with and who I don't. I need people that when they commit, they are ready to invest mind, body, spirit, time, energy, resources, money. They are ready to invest in moving quantum level leap into their next. And so there's my website. And so the value that you get is when you commit, because this is a joint adventure, when you commit, you will achieve quantum level results, not just to your bottom line, because I honestly don't care about your bottom line. I know you do, but it's more around the impact and the sustainable way you're creating growth for you, your organization, and your people. And so my people typically tend to be leaders that are inspiring, influencing, impacting teams, cultures, organizations, and communities. They believe in growing other leaders because it's really a lead it forward model. And so those leaders that work with me will get the tools they need to then be leading it forward to lift. Because I believe strongly in my heart, leadership is a stance that is one arm forward and one arm back, which means I am lifting my hand out for those ahead of me to mentor, guide me, and raise me. But at the same time, I better well have my hand back to lift those behind me to bring them into their next leadership as well. And so that's the value that those that work with me get, is they really do get the tools to not only raise themselves on a quantum level, but then to bring those behind them with them on that journey.
Okay, so Candy Barone, Candy, Barone, BARONE.com or @gmail.com. Candy, thank you so very much for joining me today. I really and truly appreciate it, and I look forward to our next conversation. I really and truly do.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful rest of 2024, a great Christmas, and I hope you have a fantastic year next year. Take care.
Thank you, too.
Red O'Laughlin here, getting ready to sign off on the Wise Ones. Typically, we'd be starting a show called Talking Heads right now. We're in the second week of how do you prepare for an optimal health journey in 2024? So join me in about 10 minutes, 10 after 2 Central Time, and we'll be ready to start that. We talked about the subconscious mind last week. We're taking it a little bit further into how do we get ourselves set up for success, primarily with our health in 2024. So that being said, bid adieu to everyone, and we'll catch you all next week, same time, same show. Bye now.
Meet Lady Ella, a special ladybug who is trained by Grand Beetle on how to listen at an elevated level. After earning her gold wings, Mother Earth and Father Universe asked her to travel across the solar system, teaching life lessons to creatures to respect one another and to listen. Learn more about her travels in the book series, The Amazing Adventures of Lady Ella. The Amazing Adventures of Lady Ella, the Listening Mentor. Lady Ella's ABCs of Listening. Lady Ella has afternoon tea in London. The ocean calls and Lady Ella listens. Lady Ella listens in the Baobab National Game Park. Lady Ella's space adventure across the universe. The magical adventures of Lady Ella and her super-powered friends. There are also collections of colouring books for parents and kids. Providing world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Join our team of elevated listeners to teach children elevated listening skills. Lady Ella would like to teach you and your family how to listen at an elevated level. If you're interested in learning life lessons as well as how to communicate more effectively as a family, go to Amazon and order Lady Ella's books. They're all there just waiting for you.
When we speak, we don't hear. It's abundantly clear. Listening laces creeping, and nobody's gonna win. Look someone in the eye. If you don't, they surely will cry. You don't hear a word I say, 'cause you always look straight away. Listening laces drive people crazy. Listening laces making us blue. Listening laces, communication goes hazy. Listening laces, listening laces. Da 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 da. Listening laces drive people crazy. Listening laces making us blue. Listening laces, communication goes hazy. Listening laces, listening laces. When you interrupt your friend, you will surely have to make amends. Lady Ella knows the way to help you listen better every day. And what's that? It's listening laces. Ba-da-ba-ba. Listening laces drive people crazy. Listening laces making us blue. Listening laces, communication goes hazy. Listening laces, listening laces. Listening laces drive people crazy. Listening laces making us blue. Listening laces, communication goes hazy. Listening laces, listening laces, listening laces.